where we get off track. Because we think somehow Jesus was the balance of grace and truth. But John tells us when God became human, when he put on human flesh, he came fully full of grace and fully full of truth, all the way to the rim. You can't get any more grace in Jesus than he has, and you can't get any more truth in Jesus than he has. He is full of both. And we spend most of our life in every encounter and relationship trying to resolve the tension between grace and truth. And many of you want me to resolve that. We live in a very heightened culture. Lord knows that we are divided. Come on. And we're divided like never before. And somebody wants you to resolve it. Well, are they right? Are they right? Listen, Jesus is right, period. And you've got to land there. And you've got to land and you've got to embrace the tension. If I could resolve, is it grace or truth? Watch, Jesus is no longer God. Because you and I are not the fullness of grace and truth. There's days when you're more graceful, and there's days when you just want to punch somebody in the face with truth. Come on. And those of you that are like that, you're a little dead inside. You know that. But I'm more of a grace person. You know why I'm a grace person? Because I want grace. And so somehow we want to resolve the tension. And Pastor, resolve the tension. I can't resolve it because it's a mystery. And if I could resolve it, then God wouldn't be God. We've got to embrace it and live in it. We have to love like Jesus loved, and to do that, we have to embrace the tension of grace and truth. And here's where we struggle with this, because some of us grew up in churches that are truth churches. How many of you grew up in a truth church? Like, here's the thing. You always went to church and you knew you had a great experience if you walked out feeling really bad about yourself. Like you'd walk up to the pastor in the lobby. He's like, dude, you killed it today. I feel horrible. But I'm not going to change anything about my life. But thanks for making me feel horrible. And then you come back next week so you can feel horrible about yourself again, right? And you're like, I thought the gospel was good news. And I never heard any good news. True church. Some of you grew up in grace churches, right? Like their vision statement was, be kind. Be nice. And you never heard truth, and you never challenged. All you heard was grace, grace, grace. But you never heard truth. And somebody right now is saying, well, which one is right? Yes. They're both right. But at Rock Creek, what we have decided from day one, and what we continue to decide every single day, is we are comfortable with living in the tension between the two. Here's why. Because that's the way Jesus loved. Can I give you four little examples? Four little examples. There's a woman. You know her as the Samaritan woman at the well. And she goes to the well in the middle of the day to draw water, because all the other women go in the morning because their lives are intact. Their lives fit inside the box. But this woman's life is a mess. So she goes in the middle of the day, the heat of the day, because she doesn't want to be seen. She doesn't want to have any encounters. And when she gets there, guess who's there? Jesus. She gets there and she begins to draw water from the well, and Jesus begins to have a conversation with her, which is a no-no because he's a Jew and she's a Samaritan. He's a man and she's a woman, and they begin to have this conversation. And then Jesus just cuts right to the core. He goes right to truth. He says, hey, go get your husband. He goes to the deepest wound of her life. Go get your husband. And she says, I don't have a husband. And he goes, you're right. You've had 5, and the one you're living with right now is not your husband. Well, hello. I mean, why don't you just cut to the core, right? And then he begins to have a conversation with her, and he begins to unpack her bags. And then he says, you know what? You're trying to find water, the water of life, in relationships with men. But if you would drink the water I give you, I would satisfy your life, and you'd stop trying to find satisfaction in a man. You'd find life in me. Grace. Hello. Truth and grace. There's a moment in John when Jesus calls a disciple. You know, he called Peter and he called Andrew and he called these guys. He said, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. Well, that's pretty easy when you're a fisherman, right? You understand this whole fishing analogy. But then there's this one day, he walks up to this guy named Levi. You know Levi as Matthew, who wrote the book of Matthew. Jesus walks up to Levi. You know what Levi's doing? Levi's a tax collector. He's collecting taxes from the Jewish people. Listen, he has his own category of sin. The Bible says there were sinners and tax collectors. Like he is the scum of the earth. Here's why. Because he was overtaxing his own people. He would give the Romans the tax, but then he'd skim off the top where he was overtaxing his own people. Man, he's like a politician. He's corrupt. And Jesus says in that moment, Levi, follow me. And Levi leaves the tax collector's booth, leaves it, and follows Jesus. Can you imagine what Peter is thinking in that moment? Now, he's probably like, yeah, I'm a fisherman, I got a foul mouth, but what is everybody going to think about the fact that we got a tax collector? What are you doing? And then Jesus says in the moment, oh, Peter, it's going to get better. Listen, I'm not just calling Levi to follow me. We're going to go to Levi's house tonight for dinner. We're going to have a party. We're going to party like it's 1999. Yeah, we're going to have a party. And you know what happens at a party where there are tax collectors? There are more tax collectors. And you know who else is at that party? People who you pay money to have relationships with. There are prostitutes at that party. And Jesus is there in the middle of all of it. And the religious leaders, how they knew where the party was still amazes me. But they make their way to the party. And they start accusing Jesus of hanging out with tax collectors and prostitutes. And Jesus points his finger at the religious leaders. He says, it's not the healthy that need a doctor, it's the sick. And then he says, I have come to seek and to save the lost. You guys don't even get it. You don't understand. Levi needs me. And by the way, so do you guys. There's another instance. There's a lady, John chapter 8. She's caught in the very act of adultery. She's not thinking about it. She's not contemplating about it. She's not even in a flirtatious moment. She's in the act. And somehow, some way, again, these religious leaders know where she's at. I still don't understand that. They grab her. They drag her out in the street. She's naked because she's caught in the act. They cast her down in front of Jesus and they say, Teacher, the law of Moses requires we stone such a woman. What do you say? And he says to them, you're right, stone her. You're right. That's truth. The law of Moses says stone her, so stone her. And about the time they get ready to throw the first stone, he says, but wait. The one of you without sin cast that first stone. And you can just hear the rocks begin to drop. In that moment, the only one that's qualified to throw the rock doesn't even pick up a rock. And the Pharisees begin to leave, and Jesus looks down at her, and he says, woman, where are your accusers? And she says, watch this. She says, nowhere, Lord. And then he says, neither do I condemn you. And then he says, stop sinning. Stop. Go your way and sin no more. Stop. Grace, truth. He handles her totally different than the Samaritan woman at the well. Samaritan woman, he goes straight to the truth. Woman caught in an act of adultery, he extends grace first. Hello, he lives in the tension of this, and it is confusing. And it is messy. And it is unfair. You want to talk about unfair? Let's talk about the crucifixion scene. Perfection is bleeding out for the sins of mankind. And he's flanked on his left and his right by imperfection. Two thieves. You don't crucify thieves. You make slaves out of thieves, or you put them in the gallows of a ship and you make them row for the rest of their lives. These guys must have done something really bad because they're being crucified. One guy is cursing Jesus, and the other one says to Jesus, Father, when you come into your kingdom, remember me. And Jesus looks at this thief on the cross. Perfection looks at imperfection in that moment and says, hey, you know what? When we die today, imperfection and perfection, we're going to be in the same place. I'm like, that's not fair. He lived his life like hell. He was a thief, and he gets in at the last moment. What's up with that? Listen, everybody look right here. Jesus wasn't afraid to be misunderstood if it meant he could win a heart. Jesus was continually being misunderstood by people around him, especially the religious leaders. And if you're going to love like Jesus, and I'm going to love like Jesus, you better get ready. You're going to be misunderstood. If you're truly doing it the way you're called to do it, you're going to be misunderstood because in that moment, you're going to value the relationship more than you're going to value being right. Even though you're right. Jesus was always right. Jesus lived in the tension of grace and truth. And in every relationship we encounter, watch, every relationship, you can either hurt people deeply or you can love them profoundly, but the choice is yours. The choice is yours. The choice is mine. If you want to be a disciple, if you really want to be called a disciple, if you really want people to say, now that's a man of God, that's a woman of God, it all starts with living in the tension of grace and truth and loving the way Jesus loved. That's where it all starts. It's where it all starts, and it's where it all ends. And this is difficult. Can somebody say amen to that? Because there are just some people you want to spiritually throat punch. And then there are others that for some reason move your heart in compassion. And you know they don't deserve it. But you extend grace. You know why? Because in that moment you realize you don't deserve it. This is the tension that we cannot resolve. This is the tension that we are called to live in. This is what makes a church where people on the outside say, they're the best. I'm telling you, they're the best. Because they've chosen to love like Jesus.